Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the What If guy, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Issei travels into the different world. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. The dimensional rift was Issei's battlefield. For years, he had faced the impossible, battling nightmarish creatures, warriors from distant worlds, and cosmic forces beyond comprehension. His life had been a constant journey between dimensions, where chaos and order blurred, and the very essence of reality became a battleground. The cracks he passed through were not just portals but wounds in the fabric of spacetime. In these places, time was not linear, sounds could become images, and the laws of physics were mere suggestions. Issei's ability to navigate these broken territories, to find meaning in the incomprehensible, had kept him alive for so long. But in his last battle, something changed. The fight had been fierce, his sword clashing against a being whose nature defied human logic. This enemy, with eyes that reflected no light and a voice that echoed in the depths of space, was the last obstacle before the closure of the rift that had invaded his world. Everything was about to end, or so Issei thought. At the edge of his endurance, his body covered in sweat and blood, Issei's breathing was ragged. The dimensional rift around him throbbed with an indescribable vibration, as if the very walls of space and time were being torn apart. In front of him, in the gloom of that interdimensional battlefield, stood his enemy, the unfathomable one. It was a creature whose form defied all logic, a pulsating void that could only be approached with the certainty that nothing could ever emerge from it. Its eyes, two orbs of pure darkness, seemed to devour light itself, as if eternity was alive within them, waiting. When its gaze locked onto Issei, something within him snapped, questioning the very concept of existence. The voice of the unfathomable one was no voice but a cosmic resonance that pierced his mind, a distortion in reality itself. Every word that emanated from this creature was not language but the very death of anything that had ever had form. "You have dared to challenge what must not be touched, mortal?" There was no room for doubt. Issei felt it in every fiber of his being. This was not just a fight for survival. It was a battle against the ineffable, against something that had existed before time, before chaos, before everything. But Issei didn't back down. He couldn't. His sword, forged in the fires of a forgotten world, glowed faintly, the only source of clarity in a universe that seemed to be crumbling. With a roar, he launched himself toward the unfathomable one, his body enveloped in a whirlwind of pure energy. The air around him distorted, and the ground trembled as if the dimension itself was shattering with each step. The creature reacted in a way Issei could never have anticipated. With a wave of its hands, it opened a rift in space, a vortex that absorbed all light, plunging the battlefield into darkness. Issei felt his thoughts grow heavy, trapped in that void as if they were being dragged into a mental abyss. You can't win, because you don't understand what you're facing. Despite feeling his will fading, rage ignited in his chest. He was not going to give up. In a desperate move, he swung his sword toward the vortex of darkness, releasing a wave of pure energy that flashed in the blackness, briefly illuminating the void. For a moment, he saw the unfathomable one, its presence beyond human comprehension. The creature did not dodge the attack. Instead, the rift of darkness expanded, absorbing Issei's energy wave with terrifying ease. Every punch he threw was devoured by the void. The creature existed as a negation of everything Issei knew, a primordial force that could not be destroyed. "You are just a spark in the abyss, Issei." And the spark goes out. At that moment, the pressure on his mind intensified, the voice resonating in his head like an endless echo. Issei's vision blurred, his body trembling with exhaustion and despair. The memories of all his battles began to fade, as if the very concept of fighting was being taken from him. But then, something awakened deep within him, something older than any training or skill. It was will. A will so fierce that neither the unfathomable, nor the void of the cosmos, nor the very concept of nothing could extinguish it. Issei gritted his teeth, and with a burst of strength, he launched himself once more into the darkness, defying gravity itself, defying the unfathomable. His sword flashed with a blinding glow, every atom of his being vibrating with pure combat energy. The clash was cataclysmic. The unfathomable, in its infinite darkness, attempted to deflect the blow, but it did not account for the fact that Issei was no longer fighting for his life. He was fighting for something much greater. The instant Issei's sword touched the darkness, there was a scream, but it wasn't human. It was the sound of reality itself being torn apart, the echo of stars dying and portals closing. Everything trembled. The portal was already open, and the end could not be stopped. In that moment of desperation and sacrifice, Issei had defeated the creature, but at an incalculable price. The unstable portal, due to the intensity of the battle, Issei him in with brutal force. The warrior disappeared into the darkness of the vortex, into the unknown. Issei found himself suspended in an endless fall. There was no ground, no sky, only a chaos of light and shadow twisting around him. Without knowing how, he felt his body descending through the atmosphere of a strange planet. He didn't know it yet, but his fate was sealed. He was no longer in the rift, no longer in his world. He was like a meteorite passing through the upper layers of an alien atmosphere, burning from the friction as he descended toward the ground. The high temperatures began to engulf him, but he felt no pain. Instead, his mind was caught in a vertigo that overwhelmed all his senses, struggling to maintain control as the forces of the unknown world pulled him in with unusual gravity. Through the roar of the fall, he glimpsed a massive planet beneath him, its surface covered by turbulent seas and mountains that seemed to spill over like dormant volcanoes. Strange auroras of impossible colors intertwined across the sky as if they were signals from a distant universe. In the distance, something moved in the shadows of that world, but the speed of his descent prevented him from capturing details clearly. He only knew that here, on that inhospitable planet, his existence as a warrior had reached a point of no return. Issei was trapped in a place where the rules of physics and logic no longer applied. A being who had crossed portals and defied dimensions was now a meteorite in free fall, uncertain if he would survive what awaited him below or if he would simply be reduced to ashes before touching the earth. The fall continued, endless, into the chaos of that distant world, where time and space were no longer allies. Deep down, Issei knew that this was not just another portal or another battle between worlds. This would be the start of something much bigger, and much more dangerous. The sky split in two. Across the vast expanse of the Vera continent, where war never ceased, the echoes of conflict resonated through the valleys, mountains, and cities struggling to survive. The roar of mecha, gigantic war machines that traversed the terrain with titan-like strides, combined with the explosions of artillery and the rumble of aerial battles. The troops of Furin, an empire at war with the rest of the world, advanced relentlessly, but no one was prepared for what was to happen in the sky. From the observation towers in Zorith City, the lookouts first saw a flash, so bright and intense that it knocked the thermal vision goggles off their faces. In the distance, on the western horizon, a fiery figure slid through the atmosphere, moving with the force of a comet, slicing through the layers of air with the fury of a runaway projectile. Alert, alert! Something's falling from the sky. The voice of one of the officers boomed over the speakers, echoing through the compartments of the massive war machines. Within seconds, Furin's troops activated their communication systems and began preparing for what they might consider an airstrike, but the magnitude of the phenomenon left them in disbelief. On the southern continent, Farak City watched in alarm, its radar picking up on the strange crash. A 3rd Division mecha, the Magnus X-12, whose pilot, Lieutenant Zara, was on patrol, looked up just as the glowing figure streaked across the sky. "What is that?" Zara muttered, watching the figure slide back and forth through the atmosphere, meteor-like, burning from the friction. Suddenly, the gigantic mecha she piloted was shaken by a shockwave of heat. A tremor felt even in the Magnus' metal spine. What seemed like a spark became a gigantic column of fire that crossed the skies with a blinding glow. The sight was terrifying, something outside of all defense protocol, something that the reports had not anticipated. The fall continued, unstoppable, across the continents, crossing Mihari, Drosen, and finally entering the vast desert that marked the limit of the most inhospitable and forgotten area of all Vera. The impact in the desert was so monumental that even from a distance, surveillance cameras in nearby towns recorded the explosion of dust and debris. Sensors at the Farak military headquarters recorded an earthquake measuring 8.3 on the Richter scale, the largest tremor recorded in the region in centuries. Incredible! The epicenter is over 1,000 kilometers from here. And that was an explosion to rival an orbital strike. Zara muttered, already on her way with her squadron, curiosity replacing fear. They didn't know what had fallen, but the fact that Furin's war machines could sense that energy told them one thing: that being, or whatever it was not from this world. The sky, still heavy with the heat of the fall, was now dark, covered by the blanket of dust and steam raised by the impact. In the northern cities of Zorith and Mekler, the monitors of their huge mechas detected the phenomenon, and orders were quickly issued. The metallic giants, designed to resist and annihilate, began to mobilize, marching towards the place where the creature had fallen. The report was clear: unknown infiltration. Thousands of miles to the south, in the distant city of Drosen, the mecha of the Hesperian Alliance were lining up for defense. The radar of the most advanced mecha showed a strange distortion. At Hesperian base, Commander Alden watched from the command center, where the lights flickered ominously. An anomaly in the atmosphere. Something has fallen from the sky. It's something big. This is not a meteor. The engineers and pilots knew the crash was no accident. The speed at which the figure moved and the heat it left behind indicated that this energy was not from any known project, not from Furin or Hesperian. Something had come from somewhere else. In the heart of the vast desert that separated all the war fronts, Issei's figure landed with a rumble. The impact left a gigantic mark on the earth, like a scar breaking the peace of nature. The shockwave threw a cloud of sand and debris towards the horizon, darkening the sky and marking the terrain as a convergence point for the hundreds of mechas advancing from all parts of the continent. But what no one expected was that the fallen figure would not move. Within minutes of the crash, radars began to detect anomalies. The creature that had descended from the sky had not risen. It was unresponsive. Pilots theorized that the crash had been so violent that perhaps the creature was no longer conscious. But they took no chances. Furin's 3rd Division, already 200 kilometers away from the epicenter of the impact, advanced rapidly, being the first to arrive in the area. The mechas deployed around them, their gigantic steel figures scanning the horizon, unsure if it was a fallen enemy or a new type of threat. Inside one of the mechas, Zara observed the impact site, the sand rising like a dark blanket over the motionless figure. "I don't know who or what you are, but you haven't gone unnoticed." His eyes narrowed in determination. He knew that this being who had fallen from above could change the course of the war, and Vera's future would be marked by the imprint of his arrival. With a sigh, Zara gave the order, "Move forward. The fate of all is at stake." Furin's 3rd Division advanced like an iron storm across the desert, their mecha moving with military precision. Zara, inside her massive Magnus X-12 unit, watched the horizon as the sand dunes slid beneath her machine's powerful feet. The ground vibrated with each step, and the air felt thick, charged with palpable tension. Something strange had fallen from the sky, and the radars kept flashing warning signals. As they neared the epicenter of the crash, the clouds of dust and debris grew, enveloping everything around them in a shroud of darkness and chaos. The sun barely managed to break through the thick layer of sand suspended in the air. On her mecha's screens, Zara observed that the fallen figure was in the center of a giant crater, an impact so deep that it made the earth itself seem to twist. The sensors showed an irregular energy field, as if the atmosphere itself had been altered by the fall. Zara tightened her grip on the controls, giving her mecha's legs more power. The Magnus X-12 moved forward unhindered, its imposing steel frame racing across the desert at the speed of a war train. Around them, her subordinates, the pilots of the other mecha of the 3rd Division, were also advancing, maintaining formation. "Commander Zara, we have reached the impact perimeter," Lieutenant Zek said over the radio. His mecha, the B-22 Striker, was moving forward, bringing up the rear. His tone was serious, as if he was feeling what she was feeling, the weight of the unknown. Zara didn't respond immediately. Her gaze was fixed on the monitoring screens, scanning the scene. The figure in the center of the crater was motionless, giving off no signals, and there didn't seem to be anything in its surroundings that would indicate an immediate threat. But the lack of movement or response was even more disturbing. Any creature dropped from high into the atmosphere must be incapacitated or not. Stay in formation. Don't get complacent. This is no simple accident, nor a common attack, Zara ordered, her voice echoing through the speakers of each mech. Adjust weapons, be ready for the unexpected. We will investigate, but with caution. The Magnus X-12 took another step towards the crater. The figure lay in a sand pit that was still steaming from the extreme heat of its entry into the atmosphere. Unstable, dangerous terrain, but that wasn't what really worried Zara. It was the feeling that something much bigger was about to happen. The crater was over 100 meters in diameter, and within, at the center, lay the fallen figure, half hidden among the dust and debris of its impact. Zara could see that it was not a machine, nor a beast. Known to Farak. It looked human, but it was not. Its body was covered in a strange metallic armor that seemed to fuse with its skin, as if flesh and metal had become one. A warrior, yes, but of a kind they had never encountered before. "Commander, are you sure it's safe to approach?" Zek asked, his tone now tense. The B-22 Striker was close, but not close enough to see clear details. "We'll know when we get there," Zara replied calmly, though an alarm bell was ringing inside her. The presence of this being, this fallen warrior, was unsettling. His fall had been a catastrophe for the desert, and his form, though motionless, radiated an energy that defied all logic. What could have caused such a tremendous fall? As they reached the edge of the crater, Zara stopped her mecha and ordered the others to do the same. No one moved, all watching in silence, waiting for a response from the fallen figure. They didn't dare take a step closer, as if the very air was charged with an invisible tension. The scanning systems detected no life of any kind, but the figure. It wasn't human, not entirely. Something was wrong. "Any changes to the radars?" Zara asked, trying to focus on tactical aspects. They couldn't be reckless without knowing what they were up against. "Nothing, Commander. Everything is still in order. But there is interference. Something strange with the signals," replied Lieutenant Zek. At that moment, a spark ignited. A flash of light and a deep sound, like a cosmic whisper, echoed through the air. The 3rd Division mechas shook. Zara felt her Magnus X-12 vibrate as if a wave of energy was passing through the ground. Something had activated. "Get ready. Stay calm and follow orders." Zara shouted over the radio, but unease shot through her chest. The figure dropped from the sky without warning, awakening something inside her. She couldn't let this get out of control. Suddenly, the fallen figure began to move. A subtle but clear movement. Its limbs lifted slightly, and the eyes, which seemed devoid of light at first, began to shine with an unnatural glow. The sand beneath the figure began to crumble, and Zara saw the metal warrior slowly rise, as if reacting to something only it understood. An echo of energy vibrated in the air. "Containment forces." Zara ordered firmly, activating her mecha's weapons. The Magnus X-12 prepared for what was to come. That figure, once fallen, no longer seemed defenseless. Before she could give another order, a shockwave was unleashed from the figure, throwing all the mechas back, as if a storm was pushing them with brutal force. The battle, which had seemed distant, had begun. Farak's 3rd Division had arrived to face the unknown. The rumble of impact was deafening, but for Issei, the sensation of the ground approaching was a distant consciousness. The fall had been long, almost endless. Despite being immersed in darkness, he could feel the presence of his armor, the scale mail armor adjusting to his body automatically, like an instinct burned into him. He wore the armor for a simple reason. Draig, the Welsh dragon within his boosted gear, was deeply wounded. After the battle against the Unfathomable's army, the dragon had been left almost completely exhausted. The last fight had drained his energy, and when the dimensional rift had sucked them in, Drake had been knocked unconscious, unable to help beyond the basics. Issei was also weakened, his wounds still bleeding, and his consciousness wavering between reality and madness. The memories of the fight against that creature, which defied all logic, were still present in his mind, but fading as he fell through the atmosphere of an unknown planet. He did not know if he would survive. In that moment of desperation, with the last vestiges of his will, he activated the scale mail armor. The armor, made of shiny, resilient scales, unfurled like a second skin, protecting him from physical injuries and pain. The energy within the armor, though weak due to Drake's lack of power, provided Issei some respite. The armor connected him to something beyond his own limits. The wind from the impact was searing as he fell, but he sensed something else, the presence of other beings nearby, beings that did not belong to his world. Large machines were rapidly approaching, their footsteps echoing with tremendous force. Issei, still with clouded eyes, raised his head. On the horizon, the silhouettes of the gigantic war machines of the Furin 3rd Division drew closer, but he no longer had the strength to flee. The only defense he had left was his armor, and although it was not in its best condition, he could still do something. Maybe, just maybe, he could intimidate them enough to avoid destruction before he fell unconscious. "Back off," he growled, his voice dragged by the wind, almost inaudible, but desperation gave him strength. Through the scale mail armor, a red glow faintly vibrated, asserting its presence despite the weakness of its wearer. The massive machines paused momentarily, their pilots' displays flickering, and the figures within the mechas flinched at the unexpected glow. There was something about that figure that didn't fit the warscape they found themselves in. With effort, Issei managed to partially stand, though his body shook, and the pressure of the fall kept him on the verge of unconsciousness. The metal warrior resonated with something inside him, an almost palpable energy echoing in the air. Though his vision was blurry, the presence of the machines felt like an imminent threat. Then, the scale mail armor released one last flash, a glow of suppressed fury, as if trying to defend the indefensible. Issei couldn't take it anymore. The armor's energy quickly depleted, Drake's lack of power and Issei's exhaustion too much to keep it active. The last remnants of energy in the boosted gear burst forth in a weak light, and the armor began to slowly disintegrate, the scales falling like leaves blown by the wind. Issei, exhausted and on the verge of losing consciousness, fell to his knees, the last of his strength slipping away. The figure in the armor vanished, revealing his battered body, marked by scars and covered in BLD. He had no strength left to rise. The figure that had fallen from the sky no longer intimidated anyone. Furin's 3rd Division watched him, some bewildered, others in disbelief at the sight of a nearly lifeless man, yet something in his gaze suggested he was not easily defeated. Zara, from inside her Magnus X-12, observed cautiously, sensing the tension in the air. This was no ordinary being fallen from the sky. There was something about his presence that transcended military protocol. She signaled her team, "Keep your distance. This being is not what it seems. We will assess the situation. Do not act recklessly." The mechas surrounded the area, vigilant, weapons ready but not yet fired. Issei's presence, though weak and injured, made it clear that he was not completely defenseless. He had shown a flash of power even as he approached the brink of collapse. Zara, focused on him, realized the situation had changed. This was not just an unknown threat, it was something much more complex. Who is this being? She wondered quietly as the war machines encircled the strange human. Tension hung thick in the air as the mechas of Furin's 3rd Division stood motionless around Issei. Zara watched silently from within her Magnus X-12, her mind racing. The brief display of power had indicated that this being, human or not, was no ordinary foe. The energy emanating from him, even in his weakened state, sent a shudder through the air. "Commander Zara, should we order boarding?" asked Zek, the pilot of the B-22 Striker, his voice a mix of caution and anxiety. They were too close now, and the tension was palpable. Zara remained silent for a moment, watching as small gusts of wind kicked up the sand around Issei's motionless figure. Her mecha stayed in position, but her eyes couldn't look away from the fallen being. The armor was nearly gone, revealing a human body that was wounded and scarred. Blood stained his clothes, and his breathing was weak, almost imperceptible. "Come closer, Farak," Zara finally ordered. "But don't make any sudden movements. We don't know how stable he is." The B-22 striker slowly advanced toward Issei, its heavy legs stirring up the sand as it stopped next to him. The other mechas of the 3rd Division maintained their formation, each eyeing the strange human with distrust. With a quick gesture, Zara deactivated her mecha's weapons systems and descended from the cockpit. It was a risky decision, but she felt the situation was not entirely dangerous yet. However, the nature of this fallen being made her uneasy. Like Zara, the other members of the division began to climb down from their mechas, each carrying medical and assessment kits. Lieutenant Rake stepped forward, crouching next to Issei, his gaze fixed on his body. Up close, they could see the deep lacerations, burns, and bruises, obvious signs of a brutal impact and the struggle that had preceded his fall. "He's not dead," Rake said, adjusting his glasses and checking Issei's vitals with a portable medical device. "He's in shock, but he seems human." His tone was cautious, almost awed. The fact that this being had a human pulse, despite the fall, shifted their perspective. The warrior who had fallen from the sky didn't seem like a machine or a supernatural creature, yet the energy he had emitted, though fleeting, was extraordinary. Zara crouched next to Rake, carefully observing Issei. "Human or not, he's in critical condition. And that thing we saw earlier, the armor, the glow, it's not normal. We must bring him back to base immediately. We might learn something from him." Rake nodded. "Commander, do we take him as is? We don't know if he's an enemy or a threat." Zara looked at Issei's wounds once more, her expression resolute. Finally, she gave a firm order, accustomed to making difficult decisions in uncertain times. "We'll take him to Farak," she said, pointing toward the military zone a few miles away. "And I want no one to move until we reach the base. This situation needs to be handled carefully. Prepare for an emergency transfer." Rake quickly activated a device to immobilize Issei with a restraining mechanism. The human was too weak to resist, and the medical team placed him in a special containment pod designed for high-risk situations. A pair of soldiers from the division lifted the pod with crane equipment built into the mechas, ensuring Issei was secured for transport. As the soldiers prepared the way to Farak, Zara remained silent, her gaze fixed on the fallen being. "What are you really?" she muttered, her thoughts swirling. She didn't believe in coincidences. The downfall of this man, with his strange power, couldn't be mere luck or a cosmic accident. Something else was at play, and she felt she was at the epicenter of something much larger. The mechs began to move again, this time heading towards Farak. The military base was the closest and safest place to assess the situation. Zara decided that although the war was still ongoing and her responsibilities as a commander were vast, what she had just witnessed changed everything she knew. This man, wounded and near death, had fallen from the sky, and the glow of his power was something Farak could not ignore. The journey to the base was made in silence, each member of the 3rd Division immersed in their own thoughts. Meanwhile, Zara contemplated what would come next. What secrets was this man hiding? And, most importantly, how could Farak's 3rd Division take advantage of, or rather, control, what seemed to be an unknown threat or a key to something much larger? This will be a day that will define the course of the war. Zara thought, her inner voice as firm as the structure of her mecha. The journey to Farak base was long, but Farak's 3rd Division advanced with the precision of a well-oiled machine, their mecha plowing through the sandy desert terrain. The endless dunes looked like an ocean of dust, but beyond them, the horizon rose like a promise of civilization. The vast expanse of this planet, known as Garros, held countless regions, each marked by its own conflict, but all under the shadow of an endless war. Garros was a fragmented world, divided into several continents, each with its own history, resources, and, above all, its own enemies. Humanity, scattered across territories that were constantly disputed, had forged in their struggle an unparalleled war technology, the mechas, gigantic war machines that dominated the battlefield. The continent of Furin, home of the 3rd Division, was one of the most industrialized and militarized continents. This continent was divided into several nations, but the two main powers were Furin, the capital of the war machine, and Valhalla, an expansionist empire that had begun to invade nearby territories. The war between the two sides had been ongoing for over 2 decades, an endless conflict fueled by the resources they both wanted to control, particularly the mines of Valtrex, a rare metal used in the construction of mechas and essential to the advancement of war technology. The cities of Furin were a spectacle of metal, steel, and smoke. Towers of concrete and metal rose like colossi, intertwined by cables and transport networks. The skyscrapers of the capital were almost as imposing as the mecha themselves. Factories and armaments industries kept the population busy with war production, and the streets of the great cities were filled with soldiers and workers, all contributing to the war machine of their nation. Farak, the 3rd Division's main base, was a fortified complex built in a mountainous region. The terrain there was rocky and difficult to access, making it nearly impenetrable to enemy attacks. Within its bowels, mecha hangars glowed in artificial light, where Furin soldiers maintained and repaired their war machines. It was a cold, meticulously ordered place, with endless corridors stretching for miles. The base also had research centers, in which scientists sought out new technologies, both to improve their mecha and to better understand the mysteries of the universe, such as the portal through which Issei had arrived. As the 3rd Division approached Farak, the mechs advanced steadily, cutting through the arid landscape of a desert that seemed to have no end. But in the distance, the first mountains of Farak began to appear, with their snow-capped peaks and rocky terrain that seemed cut by a knife. It was a strategic area, heavily defended, but at the same time, very far from the central cities of Furin. No one in the army wanted to be too close to the battle line, and even less so to the forces of Valhalla, who were always looking to infiltrate. Inside one of the mechas skirting Issei, Lieutenant Rake maintained a thoughtful silence. The screens inside his cockpit showed Issei's status, still unconscious and connected to medical equipment. He watched him cautiously, still thinking about what he had witnessed minutes before. What just happened? He wondered, while adjusting the coordinates of his mecha and ensuring the defenses were activated at all times. On the other side, Zara continued to observe the horizon, not missing a detail. Issei's presence had altered everything. The energy he had released, although fleeting, had been something more than a simple glow. It was a trace of power, something that seemed beyond her understanding. It was not just a matter of advanced technology, it was something deeper. The journey continued for hours until they finally reached the gates of Farak. The massive walls of the base stood like an invincible bastion amidst the wild nature of Garros. The underground hangars housing the mechs were safe, and Zara knew that any attempt at attack would be futile. The hangars were perfectly camouflaged among the rocks and mountains, and the defenses were as strong as any war fortress. "This is where we'll answer all the questions," Zara muttered as she watched the large gates of the base open to let them through. Entering the compound, the sight of Issei, still unconscious and covered in injuries, was a stark contrast to the cold, calculated efficiency of the military base. Medics and engineers were ready to greet him, while the soldiers of the division remained alert, watching his every move. Meanwhile, in Farak's research rooms, scientists from all over Furin were beginning to prepare to study the strange being that had fallen from the sky. Analysis would begin as soon as Issei was brought into one of the containment rooms. They knew it wasn't just a matter of getting answers about the human, but also about the energy he had given off. It was a chance to understand the technology behind his armor, and perhaps something that could change the course of the war. But while all this was happening, the real danger was still lurking: war with Valhalla, which had never been so close to a full-blown explosion. Valhalla's generals would soon realize the fall of this mysterious being, and once they did, there would be no turning back. It was no longer just a battle for control of resources. Now, the secrets of the universe seemed to be within reach, and Furin could not afford to lose the advantage. The 3rd Division mechs were already back in their hangars, but everyone knew that something much bigger was brewing on Farak. Issei found himself in a dark void, suspended between consciousness and unconsciousness. The silence around him was absolute, a dense stillness that enveloped him completely. Just as he felt the immensity of his own being, a familiar voice broke through the void. My, it seems the fall wasn't as gentle as we thought, huh, Issei? Drake's voice, deep and resonant, filled with ancient power, echoed in his mind. Though there was a hint of mockery, the concern beneath it was unmistakable. Issei struggled to process the words. His body ached and his mind fought to focus. Drake, he muttered, his voice cracking as if he were waking from a deep sleep. What happened? Where am I? Drake's voice washed over him, a warm presence amidst the chaos. I'm telling you, it's not good, my friend. You're in some lost corner of this world. I'm told. Apparently, you were picked up as some sort of object of interest. Drake let out a deep laugh, one that echoed with old battles and ancient kingdoms. Issei blinked in his mind and began to remember. The fall, the portal, the scale mail armor, and all the chaos that had happened in the moments leading up to it. The explosion of energy, the feeling of losing control, the impact. It had all been a blur, but what was clearer now was the certainty that he wasn't dead. He wasn't in a familiar place either. Farak. Is that a city? A country? A city? No, buddy. It's more of a military base. A large underground base, filled with scientists, soldiers, and war machines. They don't seem to be very friendly to invaders. Drake paused, considering the situation more carefully. What I'm more curious about is how they're keeping you there. Like you're a lab rat. They're investigating every part of your being, seeing how that human body holds up to the impact and the powers you carry within. Lab rat. Issei muttered, a hint of tired sarcasm creeping into his voice. Wait a second. You're saying they're studying me? Like I'm some kind of experiment? Yes, exactly. Like an exotic specimen, Drake replied, his tone teasing. They're looking to understand that strange thing inside you, the energy coming from me, the power of the boosted gear, that armor that now covers you. Oh, and I imagine they're pretty excited about what they find out about you. Issei sighed in exasperation. Despite his pain and exhaustion, he found something humorous about the situation. He was being treated like an object, a mysterious being from another world. I guess it's not the worst thing that's happened to me. Although being examined like a guinea pig isn't very funny. He fell silent for a moment, pondering. But wait, how do you know all this, Drake? Are you watching? Well, it's not like I have much else to do, right? I'm here inside the boosted gear, my personal prison. Drake's tone held a hint of bitterness, but there was also pride in his voice. I can sense things through the connection we have, and from what I sense, it seems like they're doing a thorough analysis of your being, especially that armor you're wearing. I'm hearing their mutterings. Like you're a chess piece they want to study before they make a move. I can feel how the energy your armor is emitting has them terrified, but also fascinated. Issei frowned, his mind beginning to grasp the situation. As he remained in the limbo of his mind space, images of what had happened earlier began to gain clarity. So, those mechais, those giant machines, what are they? Are they some kind of army? Exactly. Mechas as you call them. They are gigantic war machines, created to control the battlefield. They are operated by humans, of course, but they are huge, heavy, and designed to destroy. This world seems to be in the throes of an endless war, and those metal creatures are the workhorses of the warring factions. Drake let out a light laugh. I suppose it would be interesting to see how you stack up against those. Though honestly, I wouldn't want that to happen while we're so weak. Issei clearly remembered Furin's 3rd Division and how, after he fell, the mechas surrounded him. They weren't just war machines, they were symbols of this world's military might. They surrounded me. They were the ones who brought me here, right? I was still unconscious, but I felt them moving me, transporting me. The feeling of being at the mercy of these gigantic beings made him uneasy, but a part of him was also curious. Do you know anything about the commander of that division? Zar. I think her name was Zar. The commander of the 3rd Division. That one does seem interesting. Drake chuckled softly. She's no fool, that's for sure. I've heard she's a respected leader, but I don't know how well she'll treat us, especially if she finds out what we can do. Her behavior might vary depending on what she sees you capable of. Don't forget that humans always fear what they don't understand. Issei was silent for a moment, pondering Draig's words. If Zara and her people tried to understand what he represented and what he could do with the power of boosted gear, the situation could become even more complicated. All I hope is that I don't get into more trouble than I already am, Issei said, sighing. I've had enough of fighting and dimensional portals. Yeah, and the worst part is that now you have these humans on your trail. Sometimes I think we're the biggest trouble magnets, huh? Draig replied, his tone more serious now. Stay alert, Issei. Don't let them manipulate you anymore. Humans are unpredictable, but with a little cunning and power, maybe we can get something useful out of all this. Issei nodded, aware that the situation was still far from resolved. Everything seemed shrouded in uncertainty, but deep down, he felt something significant. It wasn't just that his life was at stake. The fate of this world, with its mechas and endless wars, was now somehow intertwined with his own. Commander Zara of Furin's 3rd Division was in her office, a stark space where the metal walls and cold lights reflected her seriousness. She had been watching the monitoring screens, where scientists continued their analysis of the fallen human, that strange being who had arrived from the sky in a blinding glow. The tension in the base was palpable. Reports came in bursts, but the data was vague and fragmented. No one knew for sure what they really had. Zara was not a woman to be swayed by emotions. She had led battles, managed resources, and made difficult decisions. Yet there was something about this situation that unsettled her. This human, Issei, was not simply another prisoner of war or another element in the vast conflict of Furin. His presence radiated a palpable energy that she could not ignore. Commander, initial analysis suggests this being is not of this world, one of her officers reported, his voice gravelly over the communicator. And its armor. We have never seen anything like it. None of our technologies are comparable. Zara frowned as she stared at the human's face on the screen. He was unconscious and covered in wounds, but something about his posture suggested he wasn't as vulnerable as he seemed. He was something more, beyond what she'd ever known. As she watched silently, the conversation inside the prisoner's mind began to take shape. It was difficult to hear clearly, as if filtered through the screens and technology, but the words were understandable. Draig. Commander Zara raised an eyebrow at the name, repeating it in her mind. What was this Draig? It seemed to be an important presence, and from the way the human referred to it, it was clear he was not alone. Suddenly the tension increased. Something changed in the human's body, something Zara had not anticipated. In a flash of light, his scale mail armor glowed brightly, as if it had taken on a life of its own. Commander, look! One of the scientists shouted, pointing at the screen where Issei, still unconscious, began to emanate a supernatural energy that coursed through his body. The armor, until that moment inert, activated instantly, enveloping him completely. Zara stood from her seat, her eyes fixed on the screen as she watched the glow of the scale mail armor. The energy released by the suit was tremendous. Not only was it a suit of great strength, but it seemed to have a consciousness of its own, as if it recognized its wearer. The glow enveloped the human with an intensity never seen before in any of Furin's creations. That, Zara whispered, that's not just a human. What is this being really? The captain at her side began to speak rapidly. Commander, energy scans are showing levels completely outside of known parameters. This is no ordinary armor. It has no recorded power source. It appears to be capable of generating its own energy. The captain brought up more data on his screen, and Zara could see the magnitude of the energy radiating from the human. Frowning, she began walking towards the doors of her office. She had no time to hesitate. This event changed the rules of war. Who was this being? Why had it fallen from the sky? And most importantly, what did the scientists want to study about it? Keep an eye on him. Prepare for the most thorough investigations, she ordered firmly. I want answers about this being and his armor, and I want them now. I don't want to be surprised with any more incomplete data. Commander Zara was not about to let uncertainty rule her. Although her duty was to protect her army and ensure that the Furin War was not threatened by unforeseen factors, something in her instinct told her that this being, Issei, could be the key to a radical change in the balance of power. He stood at a crossroads. The human had fallen, yes, but his fall did not seem to be an accident. It was as if fate itself had intervened. Furin was already on the verge of victory over Valhalla on the battlefield, but this being now represented a new kind of power, something that transcended war itself. Was he a potential ally? Or would he be an even greater threat? As Zara made her way through the halls towards the containment room, the scientist's thoughts continued to echo in her mind. The energy released by the armor, along with the strange life signs emanating from Issei, could not be ignored. This human had crossed a dimensional portal, and the possibility that he was merely an instrument of war for another empire in the universe seemed likely. However, Zara knew she couldn't allow Furin to lose control of the situation. If the technologies he brought were as significant as they appeared, she couldn't let them fall into the wrong hands. Arriving in the containment room, she observed the scientists busy with analyses, but the tension on their faces was palpable. They all understood that this prisoner was not just a human being. He was a crossroads between the known and the unknown, between survival and a fundamental shift in their understanding of the world. Issei stood motionless, his armor glowing softly, as if still waiting for someone to challenge him. Zara watched in silence, aware that everything that had happened so far was just the beginning. Questions filled her mind, but above all, there was a powerful urgency to understand what had fallen from the sky before someone else could take advantage of it. This is just the beginning, she thought, her gaze hardening. I will not let Furin lose control of this power. Not while I am in charge. Issei found himself once again in the void of his mental space, in a state between wakefulness and sleep. Although his body was completely immobilized, his mind remained active, dialoguing with Draig, his partner, and the dragon residing within his boosted gear. The white noise of Furin's base filtered through his thoughts, but he was still too stunned by the impact of his fall to fully concentrate on the outside world. Draig, Issei muttered, struggling to regain his lucidity. What do we do? Do we wait and see what happens? Or do we try to escape? I don't want to be another experiment, but I don't know if we have the strength to fight. Draig's voice resonated in his mind, vibrant and filled with the strength of an ancient dragon, though now a bit more relaxed. I'd say we should wait a bit, Issei. You don't have even half your strength, and what's outside doesn't seem friendly. Plus, the armor you're wearing isn't exactly discreet. They probably don't know what to do with someone like you. Issei fell silent, pondering. Draig was right, his energy was drained. The scale mail armor was still imposing, but it wasn't invincible, especially when he wasn't fully in control of his body. The last battles with the Unfathomable's army had left deep scars on him, and if he tried to break out now, he would expose his fragility and risk putting others in danger if Furin's soldiers decided to attack. Then, we'll wait. Issei nodded, though uncertainty lingered in his mind. Do you think they're preparing something, Draig? Will it be an ambush? I don't know, but this world has more questions than answers. What I do know is that those guys don't seem to want to kill you right now. What intrigues me most is what's going on with the commander. Zara. Draig replied, a hint of amusement in his voice, though seriousness underlined his tone. From what I've heard from the scientists and what I can sense through our connection, she's watching you all the time. And not in a normal way. Issei was silent for a moment, confused, but soon the word, watching, sparked a different thought. What do you mean? She's watching me. But. Come on, what else could it be? Commander Zara is so interested in you that I think she might even say you have a new admirer. Draig let out a low, almost teasing laugh that echoed in Issei's mind. Admirer? What are you saying, Draig? Issei exclaimed, horrified. He knew the dragon sometimes liked to joke, but this time it felt inappropriate. Don't say weird things. I don't want to be associated with her. Besides, I don't even know who she is. And she doesn't seem like someone I'd want to date, especially after all this. Oh, easy, buddy. I'm just giving you a glimpse of what's going on out there. Drake continued, still teasing. I can feel her presence every time she comes near. She's fascinated by everything you have, with that energy flowing through you. It's like she's trying to unravel every corner of your being. Issei tried to process Drake's words, but he felt lost on how to handle the situation. So, she's just there all the time, staring at me. What? I told you, boy. She's way too interested in you. Almost like an insect drawn to the light, or a hunter stalking her prey. Drake joked, but he also seemed to be assessing the commander's intentions. I don't know, but something tells me that if you get nervous and decide to fight, she'd probably be there watching you the whole time. I doubt it's just scientific curiosity. Issei felt uncomfortable at Drake's suggestion, but he couldn't shake the mix of confusion and frustration. Who was Commander Zara really? Why was she watching him in such a disconcerting way? Was it merely scientific interest, or was there something deeper behind her fixation? Time passed as Issei continued to converse in his mindspace with Drake. The situation was becoming more surreal. 9 hours had passed since his fall, and Issei's body remained motionless, while the foreign scientists and Commander Zara continued their research, unaware that within his armor, he was still conscious, with his mind intact. Outside, the scientists' reports reached Zara, who seemed more intrigued than ever by the results. The human remained still, but something about him captivated her in a way she couldn't explain. She had studied thousands of cases of prisoners of war from different species and factions, but none had affected her like this. Issei was no ordinary being, and the boosted gear, his armor, only deepened the mystery. Zara couldn't tell if she was acting logically or impulsively, but she couldn't stop staring at the being that had fallen from the sky, repeatedly asking herself, what is this being? We'll see what to do with him, she muttered, her gaze returning to the screen, observing Issei's still unconscious figure. For his part, Issei, still in his mental space, listened to all this. Although Drake's words were laced with irony, he couldn't shake the feeling of being an object in a larger scenario he didn't fully understand. What's going on here? Isn't anything good, is it, Drake? Issei commented, a mix of doubt and discomfort filling him as he felt Zara's gaze weigh on him. The only good thing, my friend, Drake replied in a more serious tone, is that you have a chance to learn more about this world. Just don't do anything reckless in the meantime. Issei, though still wounded and weak, couldn't help but smile at the irony of the situation. The last thing he wanted was to be trapped in an unknown world, surrounded by enemies and curious observers. But, as always, he would have to trust his instincts. And Drake? We'll see what happens, then, he muttered, mentally preparing himself for whatever Furin had in store for him. Chapter 2. The shadows within Farak. The air in Farak was thick with the stench of hot metal and machine oil, a mixture that seeped into every corner of the underground base. The distant rumble of mecha undergoing maintenance marked the rhythm of day and night in this bastion of war. High above, security systems scanned the horizon for external threats, monitoring the skies and lands for any anomaly. But what no one noticed was what was lurking within. In the darkest corridors, in forgotten server rooms, in maintenance tunnels where only low-ranking technicians and operators entered. Valhalla was already inside. The spies hadn't broken in with ships or descended from the sky in infiltration pods. They had arrived on foot. Some had been inside Farak for months, hidden in plain sight, infiltrated into the monotonous routine of the base. They were technicians, engineers, common soldiers, people that no one looked twice at. Others had entered recently, taking advantage of the chaos caused by the arrival of Issei, the strange being fallen from the sky, whose presence had altered the military routine. From the moment the unknown object impacted in the Vera desert, the infiltrators activated their networks. Encrypted messages began to move through discrete channels, transmissions disguised as maintenance reports, inventory notes with hidden codes, radio signals barely perceptible amidst the communications traffic. Reports reached Valhalla. The anomaly has been captured. It is located in Farak. Awaiting orders. The information traveled quickly up the chain of command, reaching Valhalla's strategists, who quickly understood its significance. Something had fallen from the sky, something powerful enough to survive a devastating impact. something that had unleashed energy unregistered by any technology existing on Garros. It was not a simple accident. It was a weapon, or at least, it could become one. The decision to act was immediate. The orders came down with the coldness of a sharp blade. Infiltration in progress. First phase, sabotage. Second phase, opening of defenses. Third phase, all-out attack. Code, Ashes of Dawn. The clock had started ticking. Deep within Farak, the traitors hidden within its ranks began to move with near-perfect timing. They needed no words, no clandestine meetings. Each knew their role, each had waited for this moment for weeks, months. The siege of Farak would not come from outside but from within its very foundations. Phase 1. The infiltration. Farak's secondary communications sector was cold, artificial, thick with the constant hum of servers and flickering lights of control panels. Row 9, Valhara's infiltrator, walked with his head down, wearing the standard uniform of a maintenance technician. Nothing conspicuous. Nothing suspicious. As he had done 100 times, he stopped in front of an auxiliary console, one of the many forgotten stations that were rarely used. Couldn't afford to use the main systems, that would be suicide. He pulled a diagnostic tool from his belt and plugged it into the terminal, his pulse steady, his breathing controlled. From the security cameras, he looked like just a technician checking out a routine anomaly, another cog in Furin's military machine. But what he was really doing was injecting a snippet of code into the internal network, a pulse of data disguised as a routine checkup. The message had to be quick, clean, imperceptible. Encrypted text. Destination, Valhara High Command, priority, top secret message, anomaly confirmed. Prisoner held. Base vulnerable in 72 hours. Confirm orders. With a couple of keystrokes, the data pulse was sent. Exactly 2 seconds later, the terminal rebooted, leaving no traces behind. Row 9 stood there for a few more moments, as if checking for a system failure. He grabbed his diagnostic tool, calmly unplugged it, and walked away, leaving what seemed to be just another day of work. In less than an hour, the response arrived. It wasn't a top-secret message or an intricate military code. Valhara knew how to operate in the dark. The order was camouflaged in a routine maintenance transmission, a simple status report that no one on Farak would bother to check. Hidden between lines of diagnostic data was the message, infiltration in progress. First phase, sabotage. Second phase, opening of defenses. Third phase, all-out attack. Code, Ashes of Dawn. The assault on Farak was approved. From that moment on, every infiltrator inside the base knew there was only one path to follow. There was no turning back. The clock had begun its countdown, and Farak had no idea what was about to happen. Phase 2. Sabotage. From within Farak base stood like an impenetrable fortress, its steel and concrete structure designed to withstand the most brutal sieges. But any wall, no matter how imposing, can crumble from within. Valhara's infiltrators needed no explosives or weapons to take down Farak. The war was not won with fire alone, but with cunning. The sabotage had to be silent, gradual, imperceptible. In the dark underground hangars, the war titans rested, lined up like sleeping sentinels. Each mecha required constant checks, performance tests, and precision adjustments. A single failure could mean death in combat. That was exactly what Valhara wanted. One of his agents, undercover as a maintenance technician, worked with meticulous patience. He did not disable a mecha completely, that would have been too obvious. Instead, he altered small details. A loose cable here, a miscalibrated microcircuit there. Nothing to set off the security alarms, but enough to make the machines slower and less precise at a critical moment. He altered diagnoses so the systems showed that the mechas were in perfect condition when they were not. He reduced fuel supply through small miscalculations in energy allocation, enough to cause some mechs to shut down in the middle of battle. When the attack came, almost half of the units would be out of service or operating at 40% of their actual capacity. No one would notice until it was too late. Errors in security systems. Farak's security depended on a network of motion detection sensors, long-range radars, and thermal scanners. Nothing could get close without being detected. Or so they thought. In one of the control rooms, another Valharian agent, disguised as a systems technician, subtly altered the scanners. He modified the detection parameters so that certain heat and motion records were ignored, creating blind spots in the perimeter walls. He introduced false readings into the system, generating sporadic alarms in remote areas, forcing operators to recalibrate the sensors and getting them used to ignoring small fluctuations that would be fatal when enemy mechas sneaked forward in the dark. On the surveillance screens, everything looked normal, but in reality, the Farak base was now blind at key points. Falsification of orders and changes in surveillance. Every soldier had an assigned shift, every patrol followed strict routes, every guard was timed down to the last second. It was a perfect system, until Valhara corrupted it. An undercover soldier, with access to internal records, altered the guard schedules with the precision of a surgeon. He moved certain experienced officers away from critical sectors, replacing them with rookie recruits. He reduced the number of soldiers in key corridors, creating gaps in surveillance. He sent false reports about suspicious activities in areas far from the base, distracting rapid response units. When the attack came, the most important areas of Farak would be dangerously unprotected. The domino effect. Nobody noticed these changes. They were too small, too subtle. But when the first missile hit, when the alarm sounded too late, when the mechs failed to respond, Farak base would discover that it was already lost before the battle began. And by then, Valhara would already be inside. Phase 3. The traitor in the 3rd Division. The silence was thick in the corridors of Furin's 3rd Division. Soldiers marched with DSPN, mechanics worked tirelessly in the hangars, and strategists constantly analyzed enemy movements on the screens of the command centers. From the outside, everything seemed in order. But within that war machine, in the bowels of the elite division itself, someone had already sold their loyalty. Captain Drelk, a veteran of over 12 years of Furin service, walked calmly through the corridors of the base. His posture was firm, his expression unwavering, his gaze impenetrable. No one looked at him twice because Drelk was a trustworthy man, a leader who had fought on the front lines and survived battles where others fell. But deep inside, his loyalty no longer belonged to Furin. Months ago, Valhara had contacted him. It was a quiet night during one of his missions on the border when an encrypted transmission came through his private communicator. It was an unfamiliar voice, cold and calculating. "We know who you are, Captain Drelk. We know what you want. We know that Furin is dying." At first, Drelk ignored the transmission, thinking it was a trap, a test of loyalty. But the message came back again and again. "Furin will fall, and when it does, you'll be on the wrong side. Unless you choose well." Slowly, the words began to sow doubt in his mind. He knew that Furin was losing the war. He had seen the cracks in the chain of command and felt the weight of desperation in the orders of his superiors. He had witnessed men die without purpose. Why continue fighting for an empire destined to collapse? When Valhara promised him power and riches, he did not hesitate any longer. The betrayal did not happen overnight. It was built slowly, with surgical precision. First, he tested the waters. Small leaks of information, small changes in patrol routes, nothing to raise suspicions. Then, when he saw that no one noticed his movements, he went further. His role in the fall of Farak was crucial. He knew that Zara was the biggest obstacle in Valhara's plans. If she was at the base at the time of the attack, she could turn the situation around. He couldn't allow it. So he began manipulating strategic reports, creating false alerts of enemy activity in a remote area, far from the actual attack perimeter. He made it appear that Valhara was concentrating troops in the completely wrong location. The message reached Commander Zara's table. "Commander, we have reports of enemy activity in the northwest sector. We believe Valhara is gathering an advance party there." Zara frowned. She didn't like moving troops without confirmed information, but Drelk was one of her trusted officers. He had analyzed the data himself and reviewed the satellite images. How could she doubt him? With a quick order, she sent her best troops to inspect the area, deciding to accompany them to assess the situation personally. Drelk had achieved what he wanted, to get her out of Farak at the right moment. But his betrayal did not end there. He knew the base could still react quickly if the alarms went off at the right time. He couldn't allow that. Before Zara left, Drelk introduced false data into the intelligence system. He edited radio transmissions, making reconnaissance reports show enemy movement where there was none. He diverted rapid response units to a sector where they would find nothing, taking them away from the real front. He leaked modified orders, ensuring that when the real attack began, Farak would take longer to react. Everything was ready. Zara was out. The troops were distracted. The defenses were compromised. Now, only the final blow was missing. Drelk looked at the watch on his wrist. The hour was drawing near. Soon, Valhalla would strike, and Farak would fall. The air in Farak was thick, heavy with the static of constantly operating systems. Monitors flickered with surveillance data, showing the base walls, the security perimeter, and the threat detection radar. Everything seemed in order, but that was the illusion Valhalla wanted to create. The real enemy was already inside. Furin's uniform settled into his post. He was a familiar face, someone who had worked there for months, remaining unnoticed by the surveillance operators. No one suspected him because there was no reason to. But beneath his facade of obedient soldier, he was an infiltrator of Valhalla. His code name was Sigma 12. Their task was simple but deadly: open the gates of Farak without anyone noticing until it was too late. From his console, he watched the security monitors. The perimeter was quiet. The night patrol marched along the walls, the defensive guns were armed, the radars continued to scan the horizon. The image of an impenetrable base. But he knew that image was about to crumble. He pulled a small device from his pocket, a remote access unit disguised as a diagnostic tool. He plugged it into his station's panel. No alarms went off. No system blocked his access. The spies had already seen to it that security was weakened, that detection protocols were compromised. Sigma 12 entered a test command, a simulation of a technical error in the long-range sensors. A standard warning message appeared on the screen. Scanning system failure. Recalibrating. Nothing unusual. It happened all the time. The operators around him barely looked up from their terminals. To them, it was just another routine adjustment. But what they didn't know was that while the system was recalibrating, Farak had just been blinded to any incoming signals. Miles away, beyond the mountains surrounding Farak, a colossal shadow loomed in the darkness. Hundreds of mecha, perfectly aligned in tight formation, moved like an avalanche of steel. Their silhouettes blended into the night, covered by stealth devices that blocked any thermal or electromagnetic signals. Above them, in the night sky, Valhara's stealth ships hovered like lurking predators, silent, invisible, waiting. And inside Farak, Captain Drelk checked his communicator. Confirmation had arrived. Everything was in place. With chilling calm, Drelk adjusted his earpiece and whispered 2 words into the private communication channel: Ashes of Dawn. Sigma 12 heard the signal from the control room. His fingers slid over the keyboard, entering the final order. For a moment, everything in Farak seemed to remain the same. The soldiers on the walls continued their patrols. The engineers worked in the hangars, not noticing anything out of the ordinary. The radars continued their routine sweep, looking for non-existent threats. And then it happened. The base alarms failed. Scanners stopped detecting enemy signals. The automated defense turrets were left inactive. The silence was absolute. At the command center, a security officer frowned in confusion. What the hell? He whispered, seeing that the defense turrets were inoperative. He tried to reactivate them. Nothing. Panic spread when they realized something was wrong. But it was already too late. Beyond the mountains, the shadows of Valhalla were on the move. The mechas accelerated, their massive steel legs pounding the ground hard, kicking up clouds of dust as they went. In the sky, the stealth ships fired their engines, breaking the silence with a roar that tore through the night. It was the sound of war. And Farak had no way to defend himself. The soldier in the watchtower barely had time to blink before he saw a missile streak through the darkness, hitting the outer barrier directly. The explosion lit up the base like a second dawn. The steel walls cracked. Shockwaves shook the ground. The patrols on the walls were wiped out in an instant. Inside Farak, alarms finally went off. But it was too late. Inside the base, chaos broke out. Soldiers ran to their posts. But the defense mechs wouldn't start. Technicians tried to restore the systems, but the scanners were still blind. Commanders called for reports, but communications were jammed with interference. The attack on Farak had begun. Zara wasn't there to organize the defense. She was too far away, caught up in false leads. Issei remained unconscious, unaware that the storm had arrived. In the distance, Captain Drelk watched the destruction with inhuman calm. Farak was falling, and no one could stop him. The earth shook. Explosions devoured the horizon as Valhara's mecha tore through the ruins of the outer wall, advancing with a mechanical coolness that only war machines could possess. Furin's troops, disorganized and caught in chaos, tried to fight back. But their mecha wouldn't start, their turrets wouldn't fire, and their defenses were gone. The first to fall were the soldiers stationed on the defense line. Valhara's lead mecha, a black steel colossus in imposing thick plate armor, raised its rotary cannon and unleashed a shower of projectiles that tore through the soldiers' bodies. One of Furin's mecha managed to start just in time. The pilot, his eyes wide with terror, charged at the enemy with his plasma saber. Die UBSA. He roared over the radio with the desperation of a man out of options. The saber traced an arc of incandescent light in the air and pierced the chest of the first Valharian mecha. The steel burned, melted, and the pilot inside screamed as he felt the heat devour his cockpit. But there was no time to celebrate. Another enemy mecha, twice its size, shot him at point-blank range. An energy projectile ripped through the torso of Furin's mecha, piercing it from side to side. His smoldering remains fell to the ground, and his machine collapsed in a pile of shattered metal. Valhara's mechas continued their advance. From the stealth ships, missile batteries began to rain down like a hellish storm. Farak's hangars were the first to be reduced to ashes. The massive blast doors burst open in a shower of debris, and flames engulfed the bodies of the mechanics trapped inside. Some died instantly, while others ran out, engulfed in flames, screaming as they tried to escape. The pilots who attempted to climb into their mechas died before touching the controls. The 3rd Division attempted to reorganize, but traitors within the base continued to delay emergency responses. The enemy gave no respite. Despite the carnage, some Furin pilots managed to get to their feet. Commander Zan, a veteran of 1,000 battles, climbed into his mecha, the Magnus 04 model, a gigantic machine with a 2-meter-long plasma saber. "To me, warriors of Furin," he roared into the radio, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Defend the base or die." The surviving mechas regrouped, forming a line of resistance in the rubble. Bullets ricocheted off their armor, explosions lit up the sky, and the sound of metal clashing against metal was deafening. Zan found his opponent, a Valhara mecha, the Titanus X model, a 12-meter-tall monster with a saw blade on its right arm. The crash was brutal. Zan dodged the first attack at the last second. The massive saw passed inches from his cockpit, creating sparks as it cut through the air. He spun with deadly precision and slashed with his saber, tearing apart one of the enemy's legs. But the enemy mecha did not fall. It raised its left arm, equipped with a cannon, and fired at point-blank range. The explosion tore off Magnus 04's right arm. Zan roared in rage and pain, but he did not give up. With his remaining arm, he pierced the Titanus XS core with his saber, twisting it inside its torso. The enemy machine convulsed, and the pilot inside screamed before being torn apart by the internal explosion. Zan stepped back just in time to avoid the blast wave. But a missile hit him from behind. His body was thrown out of the cockpit, hitting a wall with a sickening crunch. His spine was broken in 3 places. He tried to breathe, but his lungs were filled with BLD. He died without being able to see the end of the battle. The minutes passed, and the massacre did not stop. The charred bodies of the pilots littered the rubble. Infantrymen were crushed by the huge legs of enemy mechas or cut down by heavy machine guns. Screams of agony echoed across the radio channels. "We're outnumbered. We can't. Arg." A transmission cut out abruptly, followed by a wet sound, the sound of crunching bones and tearing flesh. Valhalla advanced without mercy. Furin's mechas were being destroyed. The pilots died one by one. Farak base became a cemetery of steel and BLD deep within the base. Inside a containment room, Issei's body remained motionless. But in his mind, something was awakening. And the war was not over yet. The night in Vera was a vast ocean of shadows, the sky tinted with a deceptive calm. But in the distance, the horizon burned. From her position in the northwest sector, Zara saw the orange glow in the sky, an ominous reflection of the chaos unfolding in Farak. The monitors inside the cockpit of her Magnus X-12 mecha began flickering with alert signals. Communication interference. Scanner cutouts. Blurry images of explosions. Something was terribly wrong. The voice of Lieutenant Zek, her second-in-command, boomed over the communication channel. "Commander, Farak signals are disappearing." Zara frowned. "What do you mean, disappearing?" Zek took a moment to respond, his voice thick with tension. "We've lost contact with the base. Scanners aren't working properly, but there's a massive thermal anomaly over Farak. Something big is going on there." Zara tightened her grip on the controls of her mecha. Her instincts screamed at her what her mind refused to accept. Farak was under attack. "Everyone move. Back to base now." Engines roared in the darkness as the 3rd Division mecha began to move. Zara led the vanguard, her heart beating like a war drum. How could this happen, she thought. The base was armored, protected by Furin's best defenses. It couldn't have been a surprise attack. Unless someone had allowed it. The cold foreboding of betrayal gripped her chest like an iron fist. The journey back was a torment. Every minute lost was a punishment for Farak. When they finally reached the outskirts of the base, they saw it. The walls of Farak lay shattered, smoking rubble. Corpses and charred remains of mecha littered the battlefield. Explosions erupted within the base, and the skies were filled with Valharian ships mercilessly bombarding what remained of the fortress. The 3rd Division fell silent. For the first time in years. They felt afraid. "For goodness sake," Zek whispered. Zara clenched her fists inside the cockpit of her mecha. "This is not a normal invasion. This is an execution." And then the pieces fell into place. Captain Drelk had manipulated the reports. He was the one who convinced her to mobilize her best troops away from Farak. He had led them out of the base at the exact moment Valhalla attacked. He had betrayed them. Zara's fury boiled inside her chest. "I need confirmation of his whereabouts." The lieutenant began typing into the system, attempting to connect to Farak's internal network. Silence. There was no response. Zara gritted her teeth. "If that man is still alive, I'll confront him myself." The enemy mechas began to turn towards them. They had been detected. "Contact. Hostile mecha approaching." Zek shouted. Zara did not hesitate. "Attack without mercy. Advance and leave nothing standing." The Magnus X-12 launched itself into combat. The first Valharian mecha fired a missile directly at her. Zara dodged. The projectile passed just inches from her mecha, but the shockwave shook the cockpit. Without wasting a second, she activated the blades on her left arm, a lethal extension of sharp metal, and slashed through the enemy's torso. The enemy pilot screamed as Zara's blade pierced the cockpit, and his mecha exploded. But there was no time to think. 2 enemy mechs launched themselves at her simultaneously. Zara raised her energy shield, blocking the shots. She then spun around and fired her cannon into the face of the first attacker. His head exploded in a cloud of fire and metal. The second enemy attempted to circle around her, but Zara activated her mecha's thrusters, sliding beneath her opponent and driving her blade into the junction of his torso and mechanical leg. The enemy mecha fell to its knees, vulnerable. Without hesitation, Zara stomped the cockpit with the leg of her Magnus X. The pilot inside was crushed in an instant. The battle for Farak had begun again. While they were fighting, Zek finally managed to connect to the internal network. His face paled as he saw the last communication log. "Commander," his voice was low, contained by rage, "we have confirmation." Drelk transmitted the attack code. The The signal came from within Farak. Zara closed her eyes for a second. There was no doubt. The man she had entrusted her army to was Farak's executioner. If he's still alive, Zara whispered, her voice edged with steel, I'll find him. And with a roar of fury, her mecha launched itself back into combat. In the darkness of the containment room, Issei lay there, motionless, but fully awake. Furin's scientists and soldiers had stopped pestering him with further tests or questions. He had learned, over the years, that sometimes the best strategy was not to fight, but to wait. His body was weakened. The dimensional fall had worn him down more than he would admit. But he still had power. He could still move. He just didn't want to. This is so boring, he muttered in his mind. From inside the boosted gear, Draig's deep voice echoed with its usual mocking tone. Welcome to the prison of cowards. I'm glad. You're enjoying it. Issei snorted mentally. We could have gotten out of here hours ago, but I'm waiting for the right moment. Sure. Or you're just a first-class slacker. Issei rolled his eyes. Draig, how many are out there? The Welsh dragon paused before answering. 12 scientists. 4 armed guards. Cameras in every corner. Nothing special. Issei sighed. He knew he was being watched. He knew Zara was obsessed with him, that the scientists didn't understand what he really was, and that the soldiers saw him as a threat to be contained, not an ally. But it was not yet time to do anything. For now, he would wait. Wake me up if something interesting happens. Oh, don't worry. Draig let out a deep laugh. I think that's going to happen sooner than you think. And then he felt it. The explosion shook the world. A shockwave rippled through Farak's base like an earthquake, causing lights to flicker and metal to creak in the walls. The scientists in the containment room screamed and clung to their desks, their monitors flashing with red alerts. The guards, who had been relaxed, immediately raised their rifles, staring at the door with tense faces. What the hell was that? The alarms began to sound, but they were late. Gunshots were heard in the hallways. The emergency lights flashed bright red, and the sound of running boots filled the air. Something had broken through the outer barrier. Farak was under attack. From his position on the containment stretcher, Issei smiled to himself. Draig. Yes, my friend. This just got interesting. The air changed. Issei felt it on his skin, in every fiber of his being. That smell. Burning metal, fresh BLD, dust and debris floating in the air. It was war. He could hear her. The screams. The roars of the mechs in combat. The explosions that shattered the ground. And then, something else came along. The presence of death. Somewhere in the base, someone screamed in unspeakable terror. Not a battle cry. Not a cry of pain. It was the sound of a man who knew he was going to die. The sound cut off abruptly. Issei exhaled slowly. They are killing everyone. Of course. They didn't come to capture, they came to exterminate. So, what do we do? Draig let out a hoarse laugh. That's up to you, Issei. You can keep lying there. Or you can show them who you really are. Issei closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the explosions, feeling the metal vibrate around him. The scientists were screaming. The guards were running, desperate. The world around them was falling apart. The fires of war spread across Farak. And he still hadn't decided what to do. The sound of war echoed around every corner of Farak. Explosions shook the foundations of the base, causing metal panels to creak and lights to flicker with an erratic glow. The screams of wounded soldiers, gunfire, and the roar of mechs in combat created a cacophony of chaos. The chaos of battle raged around them. Farak was in flames, its structure reduced to a graveyard of steel, and BLD explosions lit up the sky, ripping chunks out of the base and sending debris flying everywhere. Valhara's mechs continued to advance, crushing bodies, destroying what remained of the resistance. And in the middle of that hell, Issei Hyoudou opened his eyes with a fierce gleam. His boosted gear glowed on his left arm, the red scales vibrating with pure energy. The power of Draig, the Red Dragon Emperor, slumbered within that gauntlet. But not for long. A pulse of energy ran through his body, and the ground beneath his feet cracked. The scientist, who had been following him until now, froze, her face reflecting a mixture of terror and astonishment. What are you? She stammered, taking a step back. Issei did not respond. The heat of combat enveloped him, the air stank of death, and the mechanical roars of the Valharian mechs rumbled like bloodthirsty metal demons. There was no time for explanations. There was only one thing to do. Drake, he whispered. The dragon's roar erupted within his mind, a thunder in the storm of battle. Balance breaker. An explosion of scarlet light enveloped Issei. Red flames erupted from his body like a hellish storm, devouring the air and causing the ground beneath his feet to tremble. Dragon scales began to cover his skin, first his arms, then his torso, then his head, until his entire body was covered in crimson armor, imposing and terrifying. His energy wings spread out, creating pressure so intense that debris floated around him. The balance breaker, scale mail was complete. The age of man was over. The dragon age had begun. Issei looked up, his green visor glowing like the eyes of a beast. And then he disappeared in a flash of speed. A nearby Valharian turned towards him, its detection system finally picking up on Issei's overwhelming presence. The pilot inside the machine barely had time to react. Issei was already upon him. With incredible speed, he crashed into the mecha's torso, sinking his scale-covered fist into the armor. The metal twisted and broke easily. Issei's fist pierced through the cabin, and the enemy pilot was silenced in an instant. BLD sprayed out from the damaged armor, splattering the remains with a dark, sticky red. With a brutal movement, Issei tore his arm from inside the machine and shattered the mecha's head with a single blow, making it collapse like a soulless corpse. A second enemy lunged at him, brandishing a massive plasma sword. Too slow. Issei raised his hand and caught the sword in his claws. The glowing metal sizzled against his armor, but Issei felt nothing. He spun around and launched a kick directly at the mecha's torso. The impact was devastating, sending the mecha flying as if hit by a speeding train. It crashed into a destroyed building and exploded in a fireball. 2 down, and it was just the beginning. BLD soaked the battlefield, leaving Furin soldiers in shock at the massacre Issei was unleashing. By the gods! One soldier exclaimed. Who the hell is that? Valhara mechas did not stop. 3 more surrounded him, firing in frantic bursts of missiles, plasma bolts, and armor-piercing bullets. Issei moved, vanishing in a burst of speed, dodging each attack with precise and ferocious movements. He leapt over the mechas, descending upon the first one with the force of a meteor. His left bracelet charged with energy. Dragon shot. A beam of hellfire shot out from his fist, disintegrating the enemy mecha instantly. The second tried to react, but Issei was already upon him. He ripped off its mechanical arm, used it as a makeshift weapon, and split the machine's torso in 2. The third mecha tried to flee, but Issei did not allow it. He jumped onto its back, grabbed the cockpit with both hands, and ripped it off the mecha's body as if opening a can. The pilot inside screamed in terror. Issei looked at him for a second, then squeezed the cockpit, crushing the pilot inside. The enemy's body exploded into a pool of BLD. Issei dropped the remains, letting the pieces of flesh and metal fall to the ground. 3 less, and there were still many more. The Valharians finally understood what they were facing. He was not a simple soldier, he was a force of nature. It was the Red Dragon Emperor. But it didn't matter. They couldn't turn back. With orders from their commanders, they charged en masse towards Issei. Dozens of missiles rained down on him, and bullets flew like a storm of steel. Issei smiled inside his helmet. Drake. Yes, Issei. Crush them. The energy wings ignited, and the thrusters roared. Issei charged towards Valhara's army, bringing with him the dragon's fury. The sky burned over Farak, fire and smoke covering the horizon as the last vestiges of the base collapsed under the siege of Valhara. Yet, in the middle of the battlefield, a single scarlet figure stood amidst the rubble, surrounded by the remnants of war machines. Issei Hyoudou, the Red Dragon Emperor. The last survivors of Furin took refuge behind what remained of the collapsed barriers, watching with wide eyes as the red-armored warrior single-handedly faced an entire army of mechas. It was a massacre, but not theirs. It was the Valhalla massacre. From the enemy ranks, they fell upon him like a pack of wolves. Valhalla's mechas charged, unleashing a frenzied barrage of missiles, plasma fire, and high-caliber shells. The sky darkened with the storm of destruction. Any other being would have been overwhelmed. But Issei was not just any being. Boost. A surge of energy exploded around him. The wings on his armor spread out with a burst of power, and in the blink of an eye, he was gone. The mechas fired into the void. Where is it? We lost it. Then they felt it. The air was torn apart by a devastating roar. A crimson flash fell from the sky like a meteor. Dragon shot. Issei's energy projectile exploded in the center of the enemy formation, sending mechas flying, shattering the ground and splitting everything in its path. Explosions lit up the battlefield, reflecting off Issei's scarlet armor as he landed with a rumble. Then he moved again. A Valhalla MKV Titan, an armored mecha standing over 15 meters tall, raised its plasma cannon and fired. The crimson lightning crossed the battlefield in an instant. Issei raised his arm and stopped the attack with one hand. Plasma roared against his gauntlet, but the energy of the boosted gear absorbed it completely. Is that all? His voice echoed through the enemy communicator. The pilot of the Titan MKV stood paralyzed. Before he could react, Issei jumped in, shooting through the air like a red lightning bolt. With inhuman brutality, he pierced the Titan's torso with his fist. The metal cracked, circuits crackled, and the pilot inside was silenced as the mecha burst into flames. But Issei was already moving on to his next target. The few remaining Furin soldiers watched the carnage in disbelief. Hidden among the rubble, wounded and exhausted, they saw everything. What the hell is that guy? One soldier whispered. It's not human. Another replied. No, it's a monster. Valhalla's last heavy mecha tried to flee. The pilot, trembling, shouted into his communicator, retreat. This is no ordinary enemy. This is a force of nature. But Issei was already behind him. The boosted gear glowed, packing devastating power into his fist. With a voice that echoed throughout the base, he shouted, boost. 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 The increase in power exceeded the limits of his armor. The earth cracked beneath his feet, and the air vibrated as if the very world trembled before his fury. Then he unleashed all his power in one blow. Dragon Smash. The impact disintegrated the mecha in an instant, creating a giant crater. The remains of the machine scattered like ashes in the wind. The soldiers of Valhalla who remained fled in terror. The battlefield fell silent, with only the crackling of fires and the yells of the wounded breaking the stillness. Issei stood in the center of the devastation, his red armor still vibrating with energy. The few survivors of Furin looked at him with a mixture of fear and reverence. One of them knelt down, saying, "You saved us." Issei did not respond. He looked at the sky as the enemy ships retreated. He had won, but something inside him knew that this wasn't over. The Red Dragon Emperor had revealed himself to the world, and now everyone would come for him. The battlefield of Farak was a graveyard of steel and ash. The rubble from the destroyed mechs formed mountains of charred metal. The smell of BLD, gunpowder, and burning flesh permeated the air, while the glow of the flames painted the horizon in a hellish red. But for Zara, the battle was not over yet. In the midst of the devastation, there was still one last hunt left. The traitor, Captain Drelk, the man who sold Farak to Valhalla. Zara gritted her teeth in rage as her squad advanced through the smoldering remains of the base. Her Magnus X-12 mecha lumbered through the rubble, its servomotors roaring with each step. Beside her, the few survivors of the 3rd Division followed determinedly. Drelk must be hiding somewhere, Zek, his second-in-command, spat. He knew what he was doing. He didn't stay to fight. Zara did not respond. She had only one thought on her mind: find him. Make him pay. The traces of their escape were obvious: a heat signature on the scanners, hurried footprints in the sand, and debris moved by someone desperately trying to hide. Finally, they found it: huddled inside an emergency capsule half buried in the rubble. Zara leapt from her mecha and strode forward, plasma rifle in hand. Zek and the others ripped off the door of the capsule, revealing Drelk, who was dirty, torn, and covered in sweat. His eyes widened in fear. "Don't kill me. I can explain." Furin was lost. "Valhera offered me a way out. You would have done it too." Zara didn't say anything, she just looked at him. Then she hit him in the face with the butt of her rifle. Drelk spat out BLD and fell to the ground with a scream. But they weren't done with him. They dragged him out of the capsule and threw him to the ground. Zara leaned over him, her boot pressing into his chest. "How long have you been working for Valhera?" Drelk gasped, coughing up BLD months. "Direct contact. Encrypted messages. I knew Farak was going to fall. They offered me a future." Zara increased the pressure. "How many more? How many traitors are there in Farak?" Drelk laughed weakly. "More than you think." Zek kicked him in the side, sending him rolling on the ground. "Speak, you traitor." Drelk writhed in pain, his face pale and covered in sweat. His nose was broken, his lips split, and fear consumed him. "It doesn't matter if they kill me. Valhera already won." Zara gritted her teeth. "We won't kill you yet." Drelk opened his eyes in panic. "That." Zara turned to her soldiers. "Make him talk. Use whatever methods are necessary. But I want every name he has." The shadows of her soldiers moved over the traitor, and his first cry rent the night. The interrogation lasted several minutes. Drelk screamed, begged, and confessed every detail of his betrayal. But then, something changed in the air. Zara felt the vibration before she heard it. A roar, a primitive, terrifying sound. Something had awakened. Everyone looked up and saw it. In the distance, amidst the flames, a crimson figure emerged. It was Issei, but he was no longer the same prisoner as before. Now, he was a god of war. The Furin survivors watched in complete silence. Zara couldn't believe what she was seeing. The man who had been standing motionless in the containment room was now smashing mechas like they were toys. With impossible speed, Issei tore through enemy ranks, dodging missiles, cutting through metal, and crushing cockpits with his bare hands. His armor was beyond compare. His fists pierced through the mecha's armor like burning blades, ripping out the energy cores and causing them to explode from within. The battlefield became a slaughterhouse. Valhera's mechas fell, and the pilots screamed in terror. The sky lit up with explosions. Zara's soldiers stood motionless, witnessing the massacre. Zek swallowed. That's not a human." Zara felt a chill run down her spine. Drelk, despite being broken and bloody, laughed weakly from the ground. "Now do you understand why Farak couldn't hold him back?" Zara ignored him, because his eyes remained fixed on the battle. And in that instant he knew the truth. They hadn't saved Issei. Issei had saved them. But at what price? The burning wind of Farak blew through the ruins, laden with the smell of molten metal, charred flesh, and the BLD of the fallen. Flames still danced across the rubble, casting flickering shadows over the shattered bodies of enemy mechs. The battle was over, and he was standing on a field of death. Issei exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of exhaustion on his shoulders. He wasn't at 100% yet. His body still hadn't fully recovered since his arrival in this world, and the amount of power he had just unleashed was draining him. He couldn't stay. They would all come for him now. Furin, Valhera, any other power in this world that had witnessed what he was capable of doing. Now they knew it existed. And fear of the unknown is the greatest trigger of war. He straightened up, looking around. The few survivors of Furin stood motionless, watching him as if they were seeing something impossible. Their faces showed a mixture of emotions: fear, astonishment, uncertainty. They knew that without him they would be dead. But at the same time, they knew they couldn't control it. Issei did not belong here. And they knew it. Among the faces of the survivors, one in particular caught his attention. The scientist. The woman who had taken him out of his cell, who had tried to save him without knowing what he really was. She was covered in dust and sweat, her white coat torn and stained. Her eyes were large and incredulous, reflecting something different from the rest. While the soldiers looked at him with fear, she looked at him with something else. Curiosity. Maybe respect. Maybe something deeper that had no name. But she was alive. And that was what mattered. Issei nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Then he turned his gaze. In the distance, he saw Zara. She and her squad stood on a hill of rubble, watching him in complete silence. Furin's commander, the one who had ordered that he be analyzed, that he be kept as a prisoner to be studied. Their eyes met for a single second. There were no words. There was no need for them. Zara didn't look down, but she didn't try to stop him either. Maybe he understood. Maybe not. But in that brief moment, something important became clear. Issei was not his ally. But neither was he his enemy. Not now. Issei looked up at the sky. His armor still vibrated with energy. He didn't have much time left. If he didn't leave now, his body would collapse. His energy wings unfurled with a roar, and the pressure in the air increased around him. Furin's soldiers took a step back, feeling the overwhelming force still radiating from him. Issei flexed his legs, gathering the last of his power, and shot into the sky like a red lightning bolt. The earth cracked beneath his feet, and a blast of wind and dust enveloped the battlefield as he ascended. In a single blink, he was already far away. A crimson flash crossed the sky, disappearing beyond the shattered mountains. Leaving Farak behind. Leaving behind the flames, the war, and the corpses. Free. For now.